Hello, hello, and welcome to Keep It Colorful. If you're interested in learning acrylic painting, you're in the right place. I teach new classes every single weekend, and today we are going to paint the magnificent green sea turtle, one of the gentle creatures of the ocean. Now, from the rays of light illuminating the shell to the bubbles floating up through the water, we're going to build this underwater scene together step by step. I'll show you how to draw your very own sea turtle using basic shapes and what we call the grid method. So even if you have never drawn a sea turtle before, or even if you've never drawn at all, this is a great place to start. So here at Keep It Colorful, we don't just focus on creating perfect paintings. We try to keep our focus on learning in little bite-sized chunks, building our skills one painting at a time, really one technique at a time. And I teach new classes every week, so there's always something new to explore. Now, this tutorial is absolutely free to watch for the next 7 days, so you can come back anytime to enjoy this class or even break it into smaller sections if you only have 30 minutes of time. Each class is roughly 2, sometimes 2.5 hours. So again, come back anytime to enjoy this class before it moves into our Kick Academy vault. So after the week, this class becomes only available to subscribers or tip to owners. So if you are part of our Kick Academy, don't forget that this lesson is now included in your library. And if you would like to keep this individual class together rather than subscribing, you can tip to own it individually on my website for just a few dollars. Now, inside the Kick Academy, you get access to this class as well as over 650 other detailed step-by-step classes for beginners and really all skill levels in between. Kick Academy also has creative challenges, and of course, there's built-in support right under each video where you can feel free to ask me questions as you're painting. Now, if you're ready to paint your own sea turtle, let's go over our supplies and then let's get started. So first and foremost, you're going to need something to paint on. Today, I'm working on a size 11 by 14 inch stretched canvas. Because we're using a grid, it will be most helpful if you have a canvas that is the same size or the same ratio. Now, along with something to paint on, you're going to need a few things to paint with, including some paint colors. So today we're going to be working with some ultramarine blue, phthalocyanine blue, bright aqua green, phthalo green, and that's phthalo green yellow shade. We've got some Hooker's green, cadmium yellow medium hue, prism violet, a tiny little touch of burnt umber. And for our neutrals today, we're going to be working with some titanium white and some Mars black. Along with our paint colors, you're going to need some brushes. I'll show you the exact brushes I use, but please feel free to approximate the bristle size and the bristle shape. If you're reading through a collection of brushes, I'm going to hold them up and I'll hold them next to my thumb so you can kind of approximate the size and shape of the bristles, including a number 12 flat. This brush is just under an inch wide and it's a lovely soft brush for blending. A number 12 flat. A number 6 bright. A number 6 round. And then for the tiny details today, I want you to have some smaller rounds. This is a number 1 and a number 0 round. grab for me a 1/4 inch flat brush. And then we have a few different fan brushes we'll be playing with today, including a big old bristly texture fan like this one here. I also want you to have a softer acrylic fan like this. My absolute favorite brush, or at least one of them, this is a little small fan brush. Look how small, it's as wide as my thumb. This is a size 10-0 fan from Artist Loft. I love it so much. And then for achieving some of the softness in our background, we'll also be using a mop brush. If you don't have a mop brush, don't worry. You can just use your 12 flat or even your soft acrylic fan to soften things in. We are going to do a little bit of drawing today. Now we're going to be drawing on our dark blue background. So I want you to grab a ruler for making a grid. And whenever we draw on a dark background, we need a light colored pencil. So I want you to grab some white chalk or a white watercolor pencil or white charcoal so that we can sketch our turtle on the dark blue base. Now, when it comes to getting the see-through bands for the sunlight that is kind of breaking through the water surface, you're going to want to have some glazing liquid, and the glazing liquid by Golden is my absolute favorite. I use this all the time other than gesso. It's the only other medium I really use. If you don't have the glazing liquid, you can try it with water, though the glazing liquid will make those vertical beams of light so much easier to do. So along with our main supplies, paint brushes, canvas, ruler, pencil, there's a few extras that are always handy to have nearby, including a blow dryer. While acrylic paints surely dry faster than oils, sometimes thick layers can take 15 minutes to dry, and those can add up to being, several hours if you have several layers. So I always have a blow dryer to help me quickly dry in between layers. And then I also always keep a spray bottle full of water handy. I use this for misting my paints on my palette. And just give me one sec. I just refilled this. So this is a spray bottle full of water, and once I pour my paints, I use a glass palette. I just mist the top to keep them nice and hydrated for hours while working. You want to have, speaking of water, a big old jar of water nearby, and then grab some paper towels or even old shirts or rags for drying off your brushes in between the colors as well. Okay, that's it for supplies. So let's go ahead and let's get started. And we're going to begin by pouring out some of our colors here. So the first thing I want you to grab is a little bit of your black. Put that upper way off at the top of your painting. And just a small little toothpaste sized dollop of black is all that you're going to need today. Same thing with the burnt umber. Just a small smidgen of the pre-made brown. Now we're going to mix our very own burnt sienna color out of Prism Violet and Cadmium Yellow Medium. So I want you to grab your yellow. And let's get a nice juicy squirt of that yellow, and then a smaller squirt of the purple for making our luscious burnt sienna color. All right, now let's pour out our blue hues. I'm going to start with some ultramarine blue. Just a little squirt. Then if you have your phthalocyanine blue, most artists just shorten that to phthalo blue when naming this color. Squeeze out your phthalo blue. And then the next blue we'll use is some bright aqua green. And then also go ahead and grab your phthalo green. Usually I use the Liquitex Basics paints for classes because they are the student grade paints, which makes them perfect archival quality, but also a little bit cheaper than the heavy body. But I just moved and most of my stuff is packed. So I just found this little tube of the heavy body paint, which just means I'm going to have to add more water to make it more fluid. And I use a little less of it because that little blob of green has a lot of pigment in it. So squeezing out my phthalo green with my blues because we're going to use that a lot in the water. I also want you to grab your Hooker's green, a little squirt of that on your palette too. I also like adding a little bit of extra yellow by my green. This yellow will be for mixing our burnt sienna. This yellow we can add a little to our greens to make some fun, bright kind of grassy greens. Okay, now that is it for our colors. We are ready to start step one, and we are going to pull on this blue background to begin. Now we have some light kind of dancing across the surface of the water. So as we start to think about our painting, about our composition, we're going to want to think about how far down this part of the water comes. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take these little brushes. I'm going to lightly cut the water in half and then in half again. So these both represent 1/4 of the composition. So you can see that these bits of water, the light shimmering off the top of the surface of the water, it only comes down about 1/4 of the way in the painting. So I'm not going to bring my water down any more than, if this is half, put a really light line. This is 1/4. I know that the water bands are going to be kind of sitting in an area up here. They're not going to come down more than 1/4 of the way. I just want you to keep that in mind as we are painting along. I see someone says, I don't have a bright aqua green. What can I sub? All right, I see you, Trudy Jones. I will show you how to mix some bright aqua green just really quickly here. So you can take your phthalo green, use your phthalo green, okay? And you'll need some white to lighten it. And then just a little yellow. So I'm just gonna have a little fun here for a minute. Let's take some phthalo green, which is a beautiful blue-green anyway, very close to a teal. I'm going to add some white into it until it's kind of a similar value to this bright aqua green. So I'm going to add white. And it's really close, isn't it? It's kind of like a lovely blue-green already. But it is not quite as blue as the bright aqua green. So once I get it about a similar value, like a similar lightness is what I mean when I say value, then I know I need it to be a little bit more blue than the phthalo green. So once I get it here, so I'm kind of squinting my eyes and making sure it's a similar value. So now don't use ultramarine because that's a purpley blue and it will mute the color. Use phthalo blue, which is already very much like a turquoise blue. And phthalo blue has a really, really strong tinting strength. So when I say go just the tip, I mean just the tip into that blue, and then we can add it. And this is going to take it to a very, very almost identical color. Go just the tip in the blue again until it's kind of looking like a aqua green, right? Which is just kind of another way of saying it's easy to go too far with the phthalo blue, but this is pretty darn close. And I'll put them side by side. So here's my homemade bright aqua green where I use phthalo green and phthalo blue and white. And here is the phthalo bright aqua green from the tube. Yeah, look at that. Very, very similar colors. So you can absolutely make your own bright aqua green just by mixing white phthalo green and phthalo blue. So I hope that helps anyone out there who might need to mix their own bright aqua green. All right, so now we're going to mix a range of values, a range of colors for our background. We're going to start with our darkest blue. So think of the lightest colors up here. We're going to kind of fade down into some really dark colors towards the side and, you know, sort of bottom of the ocean floor. Just give me one sec, you guys. Okay, so we're going to start with our darkest blue here. Rinse, rinse, rinse with the brush. And we're going to use phthalo blue to start. So take some of your phthalo blue, but not all of it, but a nice juicy dollop. I want you to add just a tiny bit of brown. So, you know, about 4 parts blue to 1 part brown. And mix it together. I'm actually going to add a little phthalo green to this too. So 4 parts phthalo blue, 1 part burnt umber, 1 part phthalo green. This is going to give us a really dark, almost black, but very much like a teal color, like a blackish, bluey teal. So see how it reads black there? That's perfect. We'll use that color. And then we'll use some plain phthalo blue in our water gradient as well. So some plain phthalo blue. Then I want you to take 1 scoop of phthalo blue and add just a tiny bit of white. I'm going to add a little more. There we go. So we're going to add some white. So then we're going to get about here. So we're going to kind of go from dark to light. And as we get the colors lighter, they're also going to get a bit greener. Then the next color we're going to use is plain bright aqua green, kind of right out of the tube, and I could use my homemade one or the pre-made one. You can just mix those together because they're same color. Okay, so then we're going to get into the bright aqua green. Here's our gradient. Then I want you to mix some bright aqua green with white. And since we've added some white to this bright aqua green, I want to add a little bit of phthalo green in there too, just to warm it up, like make it a little more greeny. So bright aqua green and white with a little bit more phthalo green in it. This will be our lightest color here. So here we have our gradient from our dark, medium, and into our lightest colors. Now let's grab a nice big brush like our number 12 flat, and we're going to go into some of our darkest color. So grab a nice big dollop of that dark color And we want it to come along the bottom of our painting. If I ever need more of this color quickly, I just take my phthalo blue and add a little brown, even if I have to do it on the fly. You want to use a decent amount of color in here. We're wet and wet blending here, so we want to go fast and loose. Rinse that brush off. Doesn't have to be perfect, just rinse a lot of the main color off. Then let's come into some of our phthalo blue with white in it. Okay. I'm going to take a little bit of phthalo green and I'm going to mix it right kind of over top of some of the phthalo blue with white, just so parts of it are going to turn a little more turquoisey. Then let's get into a little bit of some bright aqua green. And finally, I'm going to take a bit of that bright aqua green with some white, and I'm going to wiggle it kind of in that top area. There's a little more light coming through. And now we're going to soften this together a little bit. And we're going to think about how the light is kind of coming down. So make sure you have a generous amount of color on your painting. And now if you have a big old soft brush like your mop brush, let's start. We want to kind of soften this together. So I'm going to kind of start in my darkest color, and I'm just lightly kind of tickling the surface here. And it's okay if this isn't a perfectly flat gradient. By the time we're done, having a little texture can really help kind of enliven an underwater scene. Start to soften it together. I used my mop brush to pick up a lot of dark color just there, so I've got to rinse it off a bit. And then I'm going to come up into this, some of this lighter bit. And I'm just going to make a little gradient. You can add phthalo green right on top of any of these blues. It'll make them look more kind of teal. So see, when I add the green on top of even the dark color here, it has this really kind of cool effect. And you can use any edge of your mop brush to get blending in here. I'm just going into some of the phthalo blue with a little white just to get that nice transition between some of the lighter colors up top, some of the darkest colors on the side. Now on the sides here, you can even grab a little bit of ultramarine blue for the darkest areas. There's so much yellow in the light in this painting that having a purpley blue, I find, has a darkening effect on the deep sea colors. Okay, so we want this little gradient, and I didn't, buff it totally smooth in an arc like this. I wanted a little bit of a mottled color. And now my color is on. I've got this little gradient. Here it is really extremely close up. And now we're going to continue some wet and wet blending. So while this is a little wet, I want us to establish some beams of light. So I'm going to mix one more color here. I'm going to mix some really do. I'm going to mix some white and yellow together. I'm going to mix some white and yellow together. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow into a big thing of white, and I want it to be pretty light. And then I get a little more yellow into some white. So some of this color is really light, and some of it's a bit more yellow. So here we have kind of a yellow with just a little bit of white versus that really buttery yellow that has like a lot of white in it. It almost looks pure white, but you can see against the white that it's a little bit more yellow than the pure white of the background here. Okay, so now I want us to start insinuating some of the light at the top of the painting. I'm going to start with some of this kind of more yellowy color, and I'm going to just hold a brush. So I remember, where halfway is, and a quarter of the way is about, here. I'm going to start with some of my more yellowy white, and I know that this kind of area where the sun is breaking through comes about a third of the way over. It kind of starts as a little arc like this. So what I'm trying to do is just create some long strokes this way with my bright brush. I'm going to wipe it a little bit, and I'm trying to get this while it's still a little bit wet. Now, if you're struggling, wet the brush a little bit, and it will reactivate the paint, up to a point. And I'm not trying to cover all of the blue, but I do want to get like a little bit of the yellowy color in here, wet into wet, kind of pull in some little strokes, and then when my brush runs out of color, just kind of tap it together to keep it soft without transferring color all over the place. And I want to get in a little bit, so this can be really subtle at this point in the painting. I want to get a little bit of the direction of the light beams in here as well. So if I were to visually kind of break this into thirds like this, the straightest beam of light right here sits about a third of the way in. So I just quickly visualize that third. I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to come into some of my lighter buttery yellow. And by the way, if you're painting, you feel like it's getting really dry, If you have a spray bottle with a fine mist setting, you can very lightly mist the top, but just very, very lightly, okay? And from far away, at least 2 feet away. I'm going to come into some of this light yellow, about a third of the way over. And I know I'm going to have one beam of light kind of coming out straight here. And then imagine that there's kind of like a point. Like, let's use this blue swatch here. All of the beams of light are going to kind of angle slowly out from that point. And so here they're kind of straight. Now they're all kind of, think about them as kind of coming out from that point, because, you know, the sun radiates out equally in all directions. And then it's straight here, and then they would kind of start coming out that way. And before this dries, I want to soften this into the background. So it's not going to look white yet. It's going to look kind of blended. Which we want. And if you have your mop brush, rinse it, tap it off. Let's soften these in. The mop brush is nice because it can feather color really lightly even when it's almost dry. And if your colors are really kind of sticking, you can always just add a bit more of the dark in between. Now I want to come back into some of these lighter yellows, and I'm going to go back over my light area. Just going to pull a little bit more of this rippled texture in, and I want you to keep it soft. So if you have any kind of really hard edges, what I mean is, like, if you've got a line that's kind of like this, I want you to take a nice soft brush, like your 12 flat, and just for now keep it a little bit softer, like blurrier at the edges. We're going to come in and we're going to brighten these. Same thing over here. If it ends really funny and it's got some lights and darks, you can just kind of try to scrub it in a little bit with a damp brush. Starting with a generous amount of paint, by the way, will give you longer to soften these together. Might actually come in for a little bit of my ultramarine blue with the white. Just pull a few of the darks in there too. So starting to build in these little ripples at the surface. Now, once we have our water painted in and lightly kind of insinuating the direction of the sun rays coming through the water, we are going to dry this layer, and we're going to start to sketch our turtle. So this doesn't have to be perfect. As you can see, there is a lot more light going on up here than over here. We're going to gently tweak our background once we sketch our turtle on. So this is not the final layer. Nothing has to look perfect here. just to give you an idea of where we're going next. So we're going to sketch this turtle and we're going to add some dark shadows in the turtle. Then we'll use that glazing liquid to really clean up the sunbeams, make them brighter. And once the turtle's on, we can kind of surround the body with a bit more of the lighter teals. So we'll kind of give ourselves a base of water here, and then we can subtly tweak some of these areas of color, around the turtle's body, or bring in the darks. So you're not committed. This is like not background one and done. We are going to do some gentle tweaks with some see-through layers. And by the way, that's what that glazing liquid is for. It's genius at creating these really cool watery effects. And I've been talking to you a lot about glazing and washes in class recently. I'm going to show you, I'm going to put to practice some of those ideas here today. So now we need to let this layer dry. I'm going to lightly mist my paints. Now I know we did a gentle misting of our paints while they were still wet but getting dry. If your painting is mostly dry and you get water on it, like I've got a water drop here, if you touch it when it's mostly dry, it will start to lift the paint. That's why we don't want to get water droplets on a painting that's mostly dry. So I'm just going to move it out of the way, gently spritz those colors. And I'm going to take my blow dryer and I'm going to give this a blast. Alrighty. So now I'm going to have you grab a ruler and your white chalk pencil, and we're going to do what's called a 3x3 grid. So gridding works, you can even scale paintings with a grid as long as the grid and the reference are the same size. So we're doing 11 by 14 inches here. I'm also going to break the turtle down into some basic shapes, so you can go the basic shape route, but a grid is a great way to really help us picture, translate something in two-dimensional space into something into into two-dimensional space onto another area of two-dimensional space. So I'm going to put a grid right on this painting here. This is 11 by 14 inches, and I'm coming along the 14-inch side to do. So to do a 3x3 grid, what you're going to do is come up 4 and then 1/2 inches, and then 1, 2, 3 more little tick marks. And then it'll be give or take a few millimeters because the edges of a canvas are round and the measuring might not be perfect, but you should get 4.5 inches plus about 1, 2, 3 more little tick marks there. Then come towards the top of the painting as well. And let's do the same thing here. 4.5 inches plus 3 little tick marks. And I want you to measure all the way across. Breaking this into 3 vertical sections. Once you're there, line up your ruler. And I like to use this side of my chalk sometimes. Now, if your background's not dry, the chalk will have a hard time sticking to it. So make sure the background is nice and dry. Alrighty. Here we go. Now we're going to come along the 11-inch side and we're going to do the same thing. It's a slightly different measurement. I want to line up my ruler between 0 and 11, and then I'm going to make a little mark. I want you to come up 3.5 inches. I'll lean in here for a second. Plus 1, 2, 3 more little tick marks, and then make a mark. And let's do that again. Always measure the last one because it is really easy to forget or be off by a centimeter or so. Sometimes I forget which side I'm measuring. So just good practice to double check the last segment. I'm going to come down the other side the same way. Line it up between 0 and 11. Again, it'll be off a few millimeters because the edges are round. It's not like perfect 11 inches, but it's pretty close. So come 3.5 inches plus 3 more little tick marks. And then again, measure the last one. And then we're going to draw the grid again. All right, so you're going to want a sharper pencil for sketching on the turtle, and the chalk pencils get dull really fast. So while you go sharpen your pencil for me, I'm going to place a grid on this little fellow too, okay? Excuse me. Or if you're all ready, just grab a sip of your favorite Painty Day beverage. Today I am having some late afternoon coffee, which I try not to do, but it's so good. Alrighty. So now we're going to start sketching the turtle, and we're going to start with the face. So if I were to come up, the face is in this upper right hand segment. I'm going to lightly break this section. I'm going to put a little plus sign in there so you can see that the little head kind of sits right in this space. So if we come up to our grid and give ourselves, this doesn't have to be perfect, just break it into quarters as best you can. And then let's start with kind of like a circle shape to begin right here. And this is going to represent the face of our little fellow. Okay. And now that we have the face, let's go ahead and do the next biggest thing, which is the shell. So I always like to give a line through the sort of center of the body. So if I were to kind of come through the middle of the face down to the tip of the shell with this little line here, I want us to be able to see a nice line down the body. So one thing I want you to notice is I cut this little segment that the tail, the end of the shell is sitting in, and the shell comes about halfway into this segment. So if we come here and draw down about halfway, we know our tail is going to end up about here, and the head's about here. So if we were to draw a line, so kind of on this line here, I want you to, let's do a halfway point as well. And then we can start from here, right? If I cut this in half again, the tip of the tail kind of sits, or the shell sits kind of right and bam, in the center of this segment here. So I'll slightly draw a little line from there towards the face and kind of cut that little circle in half and then come down. So this is a nice point of access for the body. You know, a little something like this. And then let's just focus on the top shell. And the top shell, the top of the shell here, so like right here, let's look at this piece of the grid right here. Okay, so the bottom of the grid is here. When we're in this little grid section, remember the water comes down about halfway. Give or take, you might have got a little larger when you were painting. The water comes down about halfway. And then if we kind of cut this grid part in half, the shell, the top of the shell, sits at about halfway down this little quarter right here. So I know this is going to be about the tallest my turtle is going to be. And the shell is going to round towards the base of the head. Round it up to the tallest part. And then arc it down towards the point of the tail here. Mine kind of crosses right at this section as well. And it did so right here too, give or take a little bit. Okay, so that shell's going to come up, then round it down towards the head of the turtle. Now the belly of our turtle kind of sits right in the center part of the grid, and it doesn't quite touch the bottom, does it? So I notice a very subtle curve from the back of the shell through the center part of the grid, and it doesn't quite touch the bottom. So the lowest part of that body maybe is about here. Here's that center grid, okay? So now we kind of have 2 points from the tail to the bottom of the body. So let's just start to round it down a little bit like this. Okay. And let's use our grid and kind of find some points of reference. So we're kind of at the bottom of the body here. And now I want to round it up towards the turtle's head. So I like looking at this grid and I see this kind of little triangle of negative space here. So that's like kind of like there's this sort of triangle of blue. So I know my body's going to start to round up, kind of creating this little triangle of blue there. That means it's rounding up here. And then it comes a little bit into this grid section right here. And it's going to kind of come up towards the head. In fact, we can just kind of close up the shell for now, a little something like this. Okay. Now let's sketch the top of our shell. Let's sketch the top of our shell a little bit. So right here, that shell is going to start to come down below the center point like this, and it's going to meet up right about here. So the shell is going to follow the body, and then it's going to kind of start to arc up a little bit like this towards the turtle's head. Once we're here, we're going to start to do a few little details into this turtle's head. So we have this circle here representing the top of the head, but his neck is kind of coming down and out of the shell a little bit here. So you can almost think of it like a smaller circle down below the head. That's really where that neck is coming out. Actually, let's do another little circle to represent where this fin is kind of coming off. Like I like to use little circles. Is it a fin or a flipper? I feel like I've looked this up before. But the little turtles, I'm going to call it a flipper. This little turtle's flipper. Dawn, can you Google it? Is it a flipper or a fin? Curious minds. So the
limbs are simply called flippers.
Limbs are called flippers. Okay, good to know.
Foreflipper and hind.
Okay, foreflipper and hind flipper. So this is like a foreflipper. And it's going to come off the body about here. Okay, and then the neck kind of comes right down towards the body here. And I want you to reach a little line up, kind of right from about this line here, towards the bottom of the head there, like this. Okay, and then we're going to draw another little line down towards the body here. And then we can alter the base of our shell a little bit there, because the neck's kind of coming out here. There we go. And now we're going to make some details within the head of this turtle. So now we're going to make our turtle look a little bit more turtle-ish. So towards the top of the turtle's head, right about here, you can draw a circle. If we cut that circle at about halfway, okay, we're going to see another little circle. The eye is going to sit within this circle here. The eye is going to sit within this circle here. So within, or before we get to the eye, let's shape up the head a little bit. So kind of at the top of the head where that circle is, it gets a little bit more flat like this. And then you're just going to round it down towards the body. The head's going to get a little more flat. And then we're kind of right here. This is sort of the nose of the turtle. Oops, I'm so sorry. So I need to flatten the nose, still within this area. Okay, so flatten that nose a little bit. And then again, you can round out for the chin and into the body like this. So I just flattened the head a little bit. I've still got my circle here. Rounded the head down, and I just kind of squared off the nose. So it's on a little angle, that nose. Like think about the nose kind of pointing up into the corner of the painting, like maybe he's swimming up towards the surface for some stuff. Now within the circle that you've drawn here, we're going to draw a little eye shape kind of in the middle. So just a little shape like this. So that's the eye, and the circle around is kind of going to be where there's going to be some wrinkles and some eyelids. You don't have to do anything with detailed drawing here because we'll get into that with the paint. And then kind of right under the eye, kind of like right under the halfway line, I want you to do a little line like this for the mouth. And then do another little line below like this. There's just a bunch of wrinkles in the base. So do another little line like this. Now within the head of this turtle, kind of like around the mouth and right about here, if you do a little line like this, there's going to be quite a few little spots on the turtle's head, kind of coming around the eye, and they're almost going to turn into some smaller little dots down here, but there's going to be a lot of little, we can change the shape with paint, but kind of like over top of the mouth and around the eye, there's going to be a bunch of the little details in the turtle head right here. And when we get into the neck, I want you to think about it almost like it's like an oval. So if I would draw some ellipses and kind of like this, but only the front part of the neck is open, and there's going to be a lot of little wrinkles in the neck coming right down into the shell. So I often just give myself a few little lines right there to represent that there's going to be a bunch of little wrinkles there. All right, stay with me. Spritz your paints. Mine are starting to dry out. Spritz your paints if they need it. And let's get in a few of the larger features again here. So coming down into, let's get the 4 flipper on. Both of the 4 flippers here. Let's start with this big one here. This one is such a fun bit of perspective because it's kind of like coming out right at us. So down in this lower segment here, if I were to cut this into quarters again, you can see that flipper really starts angling into this upper quadrant. So down in this part of the grid, let's just go like this. I can see I can see this little bit of blue negative space like right here, which means that I know the flipper is going to be turning around there. And then from here, right, we have this little triangle of negative space in this corner of the grid. So when I come here, I know it's going to kind of come around like this and then up into the body. And it's going to mostly stay above this halfway point. It's going to arc over. And just a little bit of the tip of it is in this part of the grid here. And then to close it up, you can come back up towards the top of the turtle here. And let's just make the little shape. So here's the opening. Let's just have it come down a little something like this. So here's the big 4 flipper. And now we want this one, which is coming off the other side of the body. It's coming off the back of the body. And once again, if I were to take this rectangle here, this part of the 3x3 grid, and I'm going to cut it in half again, even quarters like this, so we can see that the flipper doesn't come out any further than halfway, which is always a good kind of point of reference. So if I put in another little plus sign there, I know the flipper comes out. Okay, so here's the line, kind of just above here. Comes right out of the body, like right out of kind of the neck's coming in here. Flipper comes right out about here, hits this line right here. And if I was to cut this just in half a little bit, the flipper doesn't come any lower than halfway up this section. So it's going to kind of arc down. It's going to come out of the body and it's going to get a little wider. It's kind of like a funny D shape like this. Funky D shape. There we go. And this flipper is kind of folding in behind. So I like to give myself a little bit of a point of reference for that. So the whole flipper comes out here, and then I want you to follow the line and come so it gets a little bit skinnier towards the outside. So basically this part under here is the under part of the flipper we're going to see. So start with the whole width and just pull it down a little something like this. And we're almost done. I want you to do just a few more details with me. I also want you to feel free to pause the video and really zone into each kind of square, each segment of the drawing. I know a lot of people enjoy watching the whole tutorial through before they paint it. Whatever helps you with your learning process the best. I'm definitely the kind of person that likes to watch it through all the way because I like to know where I'm going. But we have other painters who are just free and loose and they prefer a more free-spirited approach to painting. So there's no wrong way, just whatever way makes you happy and excited to paint. This little fin back here, flipper, the rear flipper, it doesn't really come out too much more than halfway. So kind of right under the back of the shell. I'm gonna come out and down, just a little shape like this. There are a few little details I want you to do in the shell with me now. So we can kind of see the under edge of the shell. So this is part of the under edge of the shell right here. So we're going to draw a little line. Okay, starting from here, I want you to come, like the lines are connected, and then slowly come a little bit up like this, and then draw this line over to have a little bit of the width, kind of right towards where the neck is sort of coming out of the shell. So you've got a little bit of width like this. The line is 1, and then right kind of just past the flipper, you're going to lift it up and then pinch it back down towards the neck like this. And then on top of this line, come up a little bit, and I want you to draw up and over and kind of right even along the back of the shell like this. Now here we have a few little details. In our turtle shell. Now we're going to do a lot with color and light here. But I do want us to have a few little details into the structure of our turtle shell. Okay. So we're going to have a few little lines kind of coming down the arch of the shell. So you can think of it as like 1, 2, these are kind of curving like this. 3. Okay, and then here the shell kind of starts to curve around the other side of the body. So some little curves like this. And then on this little strip here, I want you to angle out and back this way. And then when we come to the top of the shell, it's kind of going to start to flatten out. And then it's going to start to angle a little bit this way as it kind of starts to slowly curve around the body. We're just going to have a few segments like this. And then underneath the shell, if you come to the edge of these little segments here, you can draw little lines that kind of connect down like this. So these ones are angled down on an angle, kind of like a little bit away. So this way. And that's all we're going to do for the drawing. Now we are going to get into a bit of an underpainting. And I know we have some ocean, so calling it an underpainting is a bit funny, but it is the underpainting for the turtle. And I want you to get a nice little 0 round brush for me, and one that you can pull into a nice intact tip like this. For all of your other paints, make sure to keep them misted lightly about every 15 minutes or so. Or if you're working on a stay wet palette on a moistened sponge, it'll keep the paint wet from below. but we're going to go just into the black for now, and we're going to help establish some patterns for ourselves. So I'm going to drip a whole bunch of water just in the upper corner here next to my black. And I'm going to pull just a little bit of paint in there. And mix it together until it's really runny. This will help your paint kind of flow. It's going to help that paint flow. So I want you to come around, tap the tip of your brush. We don't want it dripping. I know when we mix a lot of water in, sometimes there can be big drips on the bottom of our detail brush. So make sure to look at the tip and make sure there's no big drips at the bottom. And then let's come right around our shell. And come along the bottom of the shell. And when we come along the bottom, we've got these kind of little segments here. And these, you can actually do a little wavy edge a little bit on these to kind of capture a bit of the texture of the shell. And don't forget the neck of the turtle is coming out right here. I'm going to come along the lines that we just sketched in. Seeing some nice dark colors. I'm going to come around the turtle's face. The neck kind of coming right down into the body, and actually right on the underside of the turtle's body, kind of right here, like at the bottom, where it kind of turns into the little leg. There's a little bit of a soft underbelly there. Right here. Let's do the little kind of width of the kind of bottom of the shell here. And that's just going to kind of stop at the neck like this. Now the little eye, can paint in that little soulful turtle eye. It's like a little almond shape. And we can give him some little wrinkles, some little eyelids, kind of within that circle shape. Just think of it as being a little eyelids in here. You need a nice small brush. Okay. And then right here, do a little line down the center of the face here. Like right here. It kind of shows that the head's turned a little bit to the side. And now it's way easier to paint in these organic shapes than it is to try to sketch them in. So in this kind of area of the face, we're going to have some these little kind of tortoisey shell shapes. And they're going to stop right about here. And you can kind of get some little dots that are getting a little bit smaller, you know, as we kind of come into this section of the face. And with that kind of wash, that really thin paint, there's another little kind of wrinkle under the chin. It looks like two mouths, but that's just a little wrinkle under the chin. And then it's going to get really dark kind of around this flipper here and under the shell here as we head into the neck. So it's going to get really dark under here. So then what I do as we come into the neck, I'm going to kind of try to pull in a few of the little wrinkles. We're going to cover this all with paint, but try to give myself a few little wrinkles here. Going to be pretty dark. Under here. Now into the fore flipper on this turtle, there's kind of two areas. Excuse me. There's this area along the top of the fore flipper and this area along the sides. So this, I'm going to just draw a little line so you can kind of see. There's this little kind of area that sits within the flipper like this. And within this, I'm going to just do some little shapes. These ones are all kind of, I'm trying to leave a little channel of blue in between these shapes. And they're going to be a little bit bigger towards the tip of the turtle's flipper. Now, as they get back here, they're going to be really small. And just try to fit them together like a jigsaw puzzle, where there's kind of an equalish pattern of blue all around. Now, on the sides of the fore flipper, the lines are going to kind of come out on this side. They're going to get really flat at the tip, and then up here they're almost flat. And I want you to bring some little lines kind of in to this flipper, and slowly they're going to start to kind of angle out and down like this. And the reason I like kind of pulling the lines in first is because these kind of then turn into little jagged shapes at the edge of the flipper, like this. Like this. And on the other side, it's kind of similar, where the lines are kind of angling down like this. And they slowly start to kind of flatten up and curve around the flipper. They get a little smaller towards the back. And these two have a little, not as curved as this side of the flipper. Okay. I'm going to go a little something like this. Now on the back flipper, there's a really big shadow from the turtle itself on the rear flipper like this. And then again, we've just got some little texture, some little shapes in there. This one's so far away, I don't get too crazy with the detail. Now on the other 4 flipper, stick with that black for me, that runny black, tap off the tip. So under here, you're going to have some, again, these little patterns coming down the edge of the flipper. It's going to be darker on the back side of the flipper here, and it'll be lighter towards the front of this little flipper. And I like to give myself some really faint lines if I can, like this, to remind myself that the flipper is kind of starting to curve down. These are called directional lines. Just that really thin, runny wash of paint. Okay. So here it is in an extreme close-up. And please take your time with this part of the painting. Now, in different art classes, you've probably been told things like you always have to work background to foreground, but that is not true. In a painting, sometimes the background informs the foreground, but sometimes the foreground element, like this turtle, informs the background. So we needed to place the turtle before we could start tweaking the color around the turtle, because that's just impossible to do until the turtle and the exact shapes we have are actually there. That being said, we don't want to paint the whole turtle in and then pull the light beams on, because then we are going to kind of ruin all the work we've done in the turtle. So for this next step, we're going to dry our black, and then we're going to accentuate the light on the top of the water in the background using some glazing techniques. So I want you to grab your glazing liquid for me. Grab your glazing liquid for me. And I'm just going to show you that kind of washy black when we're working with that nice thin black. You know, it's this lovely kind of runny see-through consistency. So you can get a see-through paint by just adding water, and that's called a wash. And this is okay. It makes the paint more see-through. So that's with about 60% water to paint. It gets it really see-through. But what glazing liquid does is it allows this kind of thick layer, it's crystal clear, the glazing liquid, it's just clear medium. It allows the layers to float on top of each other, creating these really beautiful jewel-like effects with our painting. It also has an extended dry time, which allows us to blend our paints for much longer than if it was just acrylic and water. So that's why it's such a useful medium. One of my favorite things about acrylic is they dry quickly, which means that I don't have to wait hours or days for oil paints to dry or add an additive to make them dry. I can work really fast, which is how I like to paint, a lot and quickly. But sometimes that fast drying is not what we want, especially when we are blending. So the glazing liquid we can add to the paint to give ourselves a much longer dry time and have them blend much more like oils. So that's what we're going to do here using the same colors that we have been using. Let's first make sure that our blacks are nice and dry. So I'm going to squeeze a little bit of glazing liquid right over top of my turtle. And then I'm going to take a clean brush. I know it looks white and scary, but this is actually just a see-through medium. And it's going to dry super clear. And now we can basically do wet and wet blending on dry paint, because we're not blending into wet paint, we're blending into pure, straight up clear, solid medium. So just a nice thin coat all over. It doesn't have to be crazy thick or anything. It's a nice thin coat. And now I'm going to come into some of that color that we use in our light beams, where we have a bit of a darker buttery yellow and a bit of a lighter buttery yellow. Just a little paint for me, okay? This doesn't have to be huge amounts. I like starting with a bit of a darker buttery yellow. And then once again, you just pull. This one's going to be kind of more straight. Then they're slowly going to, I'm going to line this dark line up here, so they're going to kind of start to angle out. And maybe one or two kind of coming back the other way. And now once those are on, I'm going to wipe the paint off my brush, and you can just smooth these in. It's going to feel really slippery at first. So we started with just a little bit of paint, trying to get this see-through effect. And if you want some of them to be a little bit brighter, actually, let's pull in a few of these little wiggles at the top. We can accentuate some of these too, starting with that darker buttery yellow, and let some of the work you've already done shine through. So here we're just kind of accentuating with these little marks. Now I'm going to take some light color for some of the lightest light beams. I want a really light one here. And you can do one at a time if you want. So I'm going to put, that's almost pure white. It's that really whitish yellow. And once you have the color on, because the glazing liquid's already on here, I'm going to clean off my brush. I'm just going to soften it in. You need just a little bit of paint for this. So you might even be able to get away with kind of moving some of this around. So pull the paint in one and then just gently streak it out. So I didn't grab more paint. That's what I mean. I just kind of came into these other bands. And, you know, if you are going to go through your turtle, now's the time. Don't worry about the turtle. Do whatever you need to get a soft blend. You can wet your brush to reactivate that glaze. I just want this to be clear, coming through the water. And once I have these on, I'll sometimes come in with either some pure white or that buttery yellow. And you can use a big brush for this too. It doesn't have to be a small one. I could use a big brush like this. I'm just using the end. Again, I'm pulling in these little marks like this at the top of the water. Okay. So just a little paint on your brush, not a lot. And now these will be some of the brightest marks. I'm not covering everything. I can even, now this is a little tricky because it takes a super light touch. I can even very lightly, I want to drag a few of these down even more. Try to drag them down like that. I'm going to show you something fun. So if I put a line over here in the dark part, like where I don't want it, because the glazing liquid's on there, I can take my brush and kind of clean it off, and I can just gently rub it off. Kind of reactivating the glaze. Maybe I'll just do one or two really bright white ones. I love this kind of light effect because one of my favorite things to do when I'm swimming is to look up through the water. It's just so peaceful under there. And I know this can look a little funny when it's like the only thing on the whole canvas. It's the brightest thing on the canvas, certainly, without the turtle painted in. But we will absolutely, it won't look so stark once we get some of the other elements of the painting in here. And by the way, just if anyone needs to tweak some of this, you can, of course, take a clean, damp brush. Like you can make it smaller just by using some water and kind of rubbing the edges out a little bit. Okay. You can keep tweaking this edge as long as the glaze is still wet. Sometimes you can just reactivate it with water. Now let's do a little more tweaking. So I have mixed some of my phthalo blue that has the white in it with some phthalo green. So that was this color with a little phthalo green. And it got me kind of like a darker turquoise color. That's just the phthalo blue and white with a little bit of phthalo green. And it makes a darker turquoise color. I'm going to wiggle some of this around the turtle. So that's some of our phthalo blue plus the white. Remember, gets us this color. But if I add some phthalo green, I'm just going to mix them so you can see, into the phthalo blue plus white, it gets a really pretty darker turquoise. And around the turtle, kind of before it fades off and into the darkest colors, I like to take a little bit of this lighter turquoise. There's this third line here. I definitely want to take some of this lighter turquoise right here because we're going to have some bubbles coming up through there. And a little bit around the turtle. Maybe follow this big bright light beam and have it extend a little light down. And so I can bring in some of this turquoise. And if your glazing liquid is still wet, you can just soften it into the background. If it's not, you can also, because this is a fairly dark on dark color, you can either use some glaze on your brush to blend it in, or you can just use water, which is I'm going to do here. So here I have this paint, and I don't want it to look so alone. I want it to look softened in, so I'm just gonna blend it in with a little bit of water. Even go into a bit more of the dark color here. I'm just gonna keep this nice and soft. Using some of this dark turquoise around the edge of the turtle, doing any little tweaky deakies. And look at these effects with the glazing liquid, these kind of cool see-through effects. They look different in different light. So this is just from rubbing the colors together. But look at all that kind of mottled underwater texture that we get just from kind of scrubbing the colors in there with some glazing liquid or water. So I like letting the paint do the work for me whenever I can. And using a glaze, using a wash is such a great way to be able to control that paint with layers without having to do all the work yourself. The paint will just naturally create really lovely organic textures as you blend it together in the see-through layers with your glazing liquid or your water. And now our background is done. We can maybe add a few bubbles to the background. But once you have the colors on, the colors really deepened, getting again some of those darker teals, like we're going to pull some bubbles up here and here, kind of that light fading from this light color into the teal and then into the darks beyond. Again, the turtle kind of in the beam of light, letting it get dark, creating this sort of natural frame to the painting. Okay. Now, usually I get satin glazing liquid, but I have glossy glazing liquid, which means it's a bit shinier. So I love the satin and the matte glazing liquid the best, but I can't always get them because I live in a pretty rural area. We're going to let this dry, and we're going to start working into the colors for our turtle. So it's time to mix a few more colors, the colors that will finish off our painting today, including our own homemade burnt sienna. If you don't want to mix your own, you can just use burnt sienna from a tube, but I kind of make a lighter and darker burnt sienna because I mix my own. We're going to mix it out of our cadmium yellow medium and our prism violet. Rinse off any brushes that are sitting in the water. So if I were to mix mostly yellow with just a bit of purple, I would get a lighter burnt sienna. So I'm going to mix about 3 parts yellow. 1, 2, kind of 3 scoops of yellow with 1 scoop of the prism violet. So 3 parts yellow to 1 part purple. I would get a really beautiful burnt sienna color, kind of like a sable brown. like this. It's a beautiful color. Now if I add equal parts yellow and prism violet, the color looks darker and it looks more red because of all the red in the purple. Now remember, any brown is basically just a combination of all three primary colors. So purple has blue and red, and then we're adding yellow. So when we add more purple to the yellow, essentially we're adding more red from the purple, resulting in a darker reddish brown. Adding more yellow makes it look a bit more orangey, more yellowy. So I like to use these two colors, one that has a bit more purple, one that has a bit more yellow. If we're using burnt sienna from the tube, you can of course just add prism violet or yellow to the color to tweak it that way. We're going to use those two colors, and we're going to make a highlight color out of this as well. So we're going to take some of this, just got to make a little more room here. We're going to take some of this homemade burnt sienna and we're going to add a little white. I love using glass palettes because I never have to buy anything else and I can just scrape off paint, whether it's dry or wet. I use a little window scraper and I just scrape my palette clean when I need more space. We're going to take a little white and add it to some of the lighter one with the more yellow and get us a lighter brown. And if you add more white, you'll get an even lighter color. So you can kind of make some lighter versions of this color. We're going to use some of our teals in our turtle as well, so don't get rid of those. We're going to get the burnt sienna in there too. And then I want to mix a few greens because this is a green sea turtle. So we're going to take this time our hooker's green and take a scoop of your hooker's green and add a little white, just so you can kind of see the color that we get. If I mix equal parts hooker's green and white, we're going to get this pretty light green. And let me show you this range of greens that we can make with this color. So the plain hooker's green out of the tube, it's a lovely green. And I believe it was created by a botanical illustrator who loved this color for botanical illustrations as a natural grassy green. So there's that hooker's green, and then equal parts white with hooker's green. I'm just going to jump over this teal. It gets us this kind of really bright, fresh green color, which is a color we'll definitely use. And add a bit more white. And we're going to use some of this light green too. Hooker's green plus white, plus even more white, we get a lighter green. So 3 greens there, looking so good in this color composition. I want us to have a few warm greens too. So now we're going to actually mix a little bit of brown into some of this green. So if I take some plain hooker's green, rinse your brush, and add a scoop of your burnt sienna. I'm going to do the one that has the more yellow in it. And it's going to give us this really pretty, more like a pea green. That's this color, plus this color. And it gives us more of a warmer brown. See how even when it's dark, it's kind of a warmer brown. And if I add a little white into some of that warmer green, you can just see the color temperature a little bit more. So that's basically this color, but plus the brown. And it can give us this really pretty greeny color. So if I add a little bit more, instead of white, I took a bit of my light yellow in there. When we mix the green and the brown and then add white, again, it just gives us this more, there we go, more earthy greens. And that's going to be it for the greens in the turtle. I'll also be adding some blues in there too. So I want you to make sure you have some of your white and yellow as well. Your medium buttery yellow and your really light one. And let's start. I like using a little flat brush. Let's come into some of our medium buttery yellow and come right across the top of our turtle shell. I'm even going to come down kind of some of the inside. I'm going to come to the left of each of these lines. I'm going to start to bring down a little bit of extra. Kind of come down the left of each of these lines and a little more down the top. Like automatically just bringing in some light into the turtle shell. I added a whole bunch of these colors in here. Wipe off your brush. Now let's get into a darker color. Let's use the plain hooker's green, say coming up into the bottom. Just grabbing little bits of paint, enough that you have enough just to smoosh around a little bit. Already, if you overlap the yellows, you'll get some different colors of green. Rinse your brush. You can add some browns in here too. If I go into the darker burnt sienna, the one that has more purple, I could add just a few. And if I blend it over the green, remember we mixed the green and the brown together. So we'll just mix into a earthy green right on the painting. You don't have to do all the mixes on the palette. Rinse your brush. Come into some of that darker turquoise blue. This was the phthalo blue with the white, but I added some phthalo green. Look up close. Look at how beautiful this teal is. This is just phthalo blue, phthalo green plus white. And by the way, after class, I take a photo of my color swatches and I upload them under the tutorial. So if you want to have that as a reference, I always post those after class. You can add some of the turquoise blue into the shell. And if you lighten that turquoise blue, it's a really pretty color. Just that dark turquoise blue. If you add a little white to this color, it's a little different than the bright aqua green. It's got a bit more blue in it. You can add any of these blues, even some of that plain phthalo blue with the white. Now we're just kind of breaking it up. You can have multiple colors in here. And the same thing with inside of these little shells too. You can add some blues in here. Or some of your greens, or both. Before we can really start layering our color, we've got to get a nice base on here. Okay. Now in the underneath part of the shell, I'm going to come more into my sienna colors under here. And maybe some of the green that has the brown right in it. Okay. getting a little bit darker under the shell there, so I'm trying to use a darker brown under here. And at the top again, by the head here. Let's get some colors in there. And now before I move along, I want to come back into some of my lighter yellow, again, across the top. Maybe even use that really light buttery yellow. And you can even kind of sketch those lines back on if you want, just with a brush, and then pull some of the color down into all these beautiful hues you have. So I'm kind of doing it like a patchwork quilt, you know, just gently pulling the colors down. Kind of insinuating the light hitting the top of the shell. Oof. It's humid where I am, but my paints are still drying so fast just because of the heat. Let's get into the underside of our turtle. I'm going to rinse off my flat brush. And under the turtle, I'm going to take some plain dark green. The green is so see-through. I'm going to come under kind of towards the neck. Even if I come right over top of the blacks, you can still see them shine through because the green is so see-through. You can even take some of this green right into the neck and the head. Now let's do it all. That green is so see-through that even if I go over my spots, this is the Hooker's green. It's not heavy body. A heavy body paint would cover a little more, so you'd want to thin it out with some glazing liquid. Let's get some green in the head. We'll tackle the big guns. The head is the thing we'll probably want to tweak the most. I know I'm not always correct, but it's this part with the most little details and the part that's going to really make our turtle look the most turtle-ish. So we can get that on there. And then let's come into one of our warm kind of brownish greens, which is just the green plus the brown, but don't go in for the super light one. Let's go for like a darker greenish brown. This is under the body right here, so it's not super light. We want to get a little bit of a green glow. Okay. Might take a little bit of one of those lighter warmish greens into the belly. It almost looks kind of like a heart shape under here in the belly of the turtle. I'm also going to take some of my darker burnt sienna, not into the part that has the stripes, but into the neck, kind of right here. I put a little bit of the dark brown here, kind of following the curve of the neck. It's all kind of dark here, but we want to get into some different colors in the head. Now I want you to grab a 0 round brush, whichever one has the most intact tip. So here I have 2 brushes, but look at this one. The tip is split. This one has a much more intact tip, so we definitely want to do this. And I'm going to start not with a pure white, but more of a lighter green. I might go in for a bit of this kind of grassy green here. One of the lighter greens. I'm going to add a bunch of water. Whenever we want to do thin organic lines, having some water to help our paint flow is really helpful. And I take a little bit of a lighter green into the lower lip, under the chin. I want to leave that little line showing the mouth. And then you can even use a bit of water to help blend the color out. So just under the chin here. And then what's going to happen is we want to have a few little highlights showing the little wrinkles in the neck. We don't want them looking like lines like this. So we have the dark color already on there. It's likely still wet. So rinse your brush off. And then even if you have to get a bit more of the darker green on your brush, okay, just kind of feather it in that curve, and then it kind of comes up under the neck. It's all wrinkly under here, so think of just kind of following the curve of the neck. You can even go back into some darker color like a burnt umber at the top of the neck if you need to. I follow kind of the curve towards the arm here. And they're so wrinkly under here, like there's little wrinkles around the legs, you know, so it kind of just pull your brush in this direction, and the brightest highlight in the neck's going to be right about here. It can help to get a decent amount of paint on there. Just let the paint do the work. Pull it on and then wrap it in the direction like you were thinking about the neck as a three-dimensional sort of area. I'm going to continue on with one of my lighter greens. I'm kind of using these two for now. And I'm going to put a little bit of lighter green, just such a little bit of paint. And I'm really using the water to help me soften it in. So if I kind of come up around the eye with this lighter green, I don't want to cover my mouth entirely. I'm going to kind of come up into the nose and around the eye. I need it to be just a small amount of paint. And then when we come to these little spots here, you can get a little bit lighter at the top of the head and start with just a light green for me, okay? It's going to be a little bit, you know, brighter around the spots. And even if my first spot's kind of sucked, because the background's dark, I can kind of carve out any shape that I like. I'm coming around the eye and those like eyelids to start. I'll just kind of carve out more interesting shapes if I need to. And I'm going to try to feather it into the kind of lighter medium green I put up there. I'm even going to come into some, remember we made the turquoise blue with a little white in it? So kind of this color or this color. I might even kind of come under the eye with some of this blue color. Softening that, just kind of tapping it in. It's so small, we can't blend like we did in a background, right? We have to do these little tiny marks. So my brush is just stained with a little paint. I might even try to weave this out into these little shapes just so it doesn't just stop abruptly, to really make it look like a stripe. I'm going to come into one of my warmer colors, like some of this light color. This was the burnt sienna with some white. This will really help brighten it up. You can even add some of your buttery yellow in there. Just make a really light color with your burnt siennas. Okay, if I add even more white, it's going to get really light. Add a little water to your paint, tap your brush off. You can see the lightest part in the head. It's kind of around here, and even though we have these little, it's kind of like two eyelids around the eye, and then like another little wrinkle around them. So we want these kind of eyelids around the eye, and then it gets really light in here and really light where the light's hitting the top of the head. And you can see the wrinkles in here just pulling in. So let's add some of the lights into the head. And if we start with the big guns, we start with the hardest parts, gives us longer to tweak them. And I'm going to come down the face right here, kind of showing where the face like kind of turns a little bit. A little highlight at the very top of the mouth with this color. I'm always looking at the tip of my brush when I'm doing this. One or two little brighter wrinkles here, maybe. Whoa. Okay. Now I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to go into a little bit of black. Pinch the tip of your brush down. We're going to head into that eye. I want you to double check no water is going to drip off the tip. Paint the eye in black again. You can go over the mouth line if you like, just to make it really dark. And then, like me, you might need to tweak a little bit of these spots. I want you to get a nice organic pattern. Okay. I'm going to do one more thing into the eye. I'm going to come into a lighter green. I'm going to use my brownish green. And I'm going to put a little highlight on the eyelid, both the upper and the lower, a little something like this. And then I'm going to come into the tiniest tip of some pure white. I'm going to tap it off on my thumb because it's such a small area. So I just want a little bit of white right on the tip of my brush. And then right here. Brace your hand against something. Okay. So we've got the face on. Take your time with the face. We can always come back to it. If you squint your eyes, we want to have the values in the right spot. It's way more important than any details. So if you were to squint your eye at this turtle, it's still going to look like a sea turtle because the lights are in the right spot. The light's coming down, hitting here. We have a natural shadow from the shell here. So even if you just reduce this to the basic lights and darks without all the detail, our minds are still going to go, oh, that's a turtle. So where your lights and darks are way more important than any of the details, okay? Don't let those colors dry out. Just the light mist on top will keep them wet for a long time. Now we want to bring some values into the turtle's limbs. So we're going to bring some colors. Let's start with this big fin in the front. I'm going to start with either some of the phthalo blue with the white or the turk teal blues, okay? And let's create some shapes. Can take some of the plain green as well. Again, if you go right over top of the blacks, you'll still be able to see them in there. Just like with the shell, we've got to get the base coat on, and then we can start dabbing in some layers. So let's get some of these greens in here. And even some lighter greens. Some of our browns. Get the colors in there. And the same thing on this other 4 flipper here. Okay, here it is up close. Okay. I see a question. Did you add water to the green on his flipper? I did not. The green is really see-through. So watch this. I'm going to go straight into this green. I'm just using a little 1 round brush, and there's no water in this green. So the green is so see-through. It's all acrylic paints have a different translucency, and a lot of the warm colors like cadmium yellow medium and green are super translucent. Now, and look, you can see that on here too. So see the yellows and the greens are see-through. Look how opaque. This is just plain bright aqua green and it's so opaque. Yellow only becomes opaque when we add white to it. So this was yellow with lots of white. So when I first put the green onto the 4 flipper here, I did not add water. I'm going to take a lighter green. One of these light greens. I might even add a little yellow in there, just because the light has a nice yellow cast. If I were to take this green and add a bit of yellow, that's like kind of these greens with yellow. It just warms them up a little bit. I'm going to take a lighter green into the tip of this flipper, where the light is hitting it, really accentuating that idea that it's sort of, you know, folding down, folding under. Keep the darker blue greens for under here. You could add some of that turquoise blue under here. And just let it get dark where it kind of comes into the body. I'm going to take a little bit of a lighter, some of that brownish green, the belly of the turtle here. And I'm even going to take some of that whitish yellow, kind of down the top, over, no black lines, okay, no more black outlines. Remember when we first did this kind of pulls down the 4 flipper like this in the black? You pull that on, it's going to accentuate that look of light. Of course, that's so light, it makes me want to accentuate some of the light taps up here. I'm using a 0 round, just kind of tapping in a little light. So now I brought the resolution of this up by adding that highlight. And, you know, the shell's the closest to the light, so it didn't really make sense that this was the lightest thing. So when I say sometimes, you know, foreground influences the background, but sometimes, same as any time we add a new element, you know, often I'll want to come in and bring some of my lightest values up, you know, like some of the little light bits in the turtle's face. Now that, you know, we lightened those, okay, I'll just use water sometimes, a clean brush, and when it's so small like this, you know, like taking a little bit of water, so the brush is just damp, and just kind of feathering out a little bit and into so it kind of gradually goes from being a really light line to fading into kind of the darker parts of the neck and face. Now let's fill in the back flipper, and then we're going to do some of the outlining for the brightest details in our green turtle shell. You're almost there. Stick with me. Okay. So for this back flipper, I'm going to take some of my darker blues or turquoise blues like these. And I'm going to pull some of the blues in to the flipper. Or some of the darker greens. This one's the furthest away in the scene, so it's really picking up lots of blue from the shadows. Then I'm going to come into some burnt umber brown, and I'm going to pull in some kind of darker spots into the rear flipper. Especially under the shell here, like this. And now every part of the turtle is filled in. Now we can get into some of those final kind of tweaks and highlights. So we're gonna dry this a little bit so that we can get some of the detailing in. Actually, we could probably do it without fully drying it. My thumb, I keep wiping paint from my thumb on here, if you're wondering why I keep painting this corner here. So we're going to take some of our lightest color here, the white with the yellow. and add some water in. Sometimes for some of these, I'll use like the lighter burnt sienna color too, just like a really light cream or light yellowy color. And add some water. I want to make sure that there's enough water with your little brush that you can start to make lines like this. Okay, we're going to kind of do some outlining of our shapes. Practice on paper if you need to, but I want to make sure you can make a thin line like this because these are sort of the final details in the turtle shell. Let's come along the edge of the shell and even up in between like this. I might take a bit of a darker color like a burnt sienna that has some white in it, but that's a little less white than the light color I've been using. We're going to do the same thing under here, just with a slightly darker color. Do a few little outlines here, like this. And when you get to the little flipper here, you're going to come back to the much lighter color. And remember, we had these shapes kind of coming in. Remember this shape in the center and then these. Okay. So we have dark colors in here. Now we're kind of creating even more segments. Where they get smaller as they come back. And through the center, so these ones are all quite long. So before we move along, take some of your light color. The light's coming from the top. So on these little segments, if you kind of come into the top of each of these, give them a little bit of a thicker highlight where the light kind of would naturally hit these little segments jutting out. Now in this part of the turtle, I'm going to do almost kind of like a jigsaw puzzle again, like little tiny segments. The ones at the bottom of the painting, the bottom flipper here, are going to be a little bit bigger. And then as we come back here, their shapes are going to be a lot smaller. We do a few of these lines. On the back flipper we can, but I might use more of a lighter blue color. And mostly just kind of at the top, like this. So using more like a lighter teal color and letting it sink into shadow over there. Now I want you to come into some black or even a really dark brown, as long as it's a really dark color. And let's put a few of this pattern along the other 4 flipper. Remember, this part is turned. So this is the underside of the flipper. This is the top. So I like to start with a little black in there. And I'm going to come around some of the pattern in this little flipper too. But for now, we are largely done the sea turtle, with the exception of maybe some tweaks into the colors. And do some final tweaky deakies into the lines and colors. We are largely done except for our little bubbles. These are going to be really small circles, and we're going to use some white. And what I like to do is I like to take a little glazing liquid and mix it into the white. This is a very tiny detail, so if you do not like doing the little details, you can omit the bubbles. If you want to add some little bubbles, let's do that together. I'm going to take, this is just a little bit of paint, okay? We want to have at least 50% glazing liquid, if not more. So this is just a tiny pinprick of white here, okay? And I'm going to do at least 50% glazing liquid. Remember, glazing liquid looks white wet, but it will dry clear. So now we have this kind of clear white. The glazing liquid also thins the paint down, which is lovely. I want you to take whatever brush you have that is the absolute smallest tip. You can even add a bit more water into here if you want to make it even more fluid. Just make sure with that fluid paint, you know, we don't want it running off the tip. So I always look at the tip if I'm doing something small. Get the big paint off the tip. I want to make sure I can make a little line before I move on to the painting. And then we'll make ourselves some little bubbles. So for the bubbles, I'm going to snuggle in because it's a small little detail. I'm going to do a little circle. That, and then even some just little dots for smaller bubbles. Okay, so for the bubble, take a little bit of the see-through paint and put a wider smiley face on the bottom of the bubble, only on the big ones. Okay, so make a longer highlight on the lower right side, kind of the opposite of the light source, and then take a little bit of a brighter white, like without the glazing liquid in it, and put a little highlight towards the top of the bubble. Okay. I might do a few more. maybe a few here. Okay. There we go. Now, if your blacks are a little more dry, let's go for the color that's a little bit darker and the brown that's a little darker. And then let's come in here. And this is the underside of the fin, so we don't have to highlight throughout. You could use a medium green, but getting a little bit of that kind of pattern around some of the spots, I think looks really nice. And then we are just going to sit back and tweak any of the colors on our fins, or on our shell. So you can have fun with these colors. There's a lot of wiggle room for interpretation and playing with colors that you like. So I might add a little light green. Or some browns. Or even some teal. You can do the same thing in your fin. You can come into some of the segments that you made and, you know, bring in some of the colors of the other colors. Now you can play with your turtle until your heart's content. I'm going to do the final tweak on that thumb spot that kept persisting throughout my painting. And when you feel like you're finished, I want you to sit back, relax, and roll your shoulders because you just finished painting your green sea turtle. There's lots of steps in this project, so there's no need to rush, no need to keep pace with me. You know, with lessons, I think it's really important to learn at a pace that's comfortable for you. And I know I say that a lot, but I am not a slow learner, like I'm slow, but I like to take my time with my learning. I like to sink into things. I find information sticks for me better if I can try to be a little bit more relaxed with my pace. I find a relaxed mind is a little bit more of a creative mind, and most of the mistakes I make when I'm painting, I make because I'm not in the zone and I'm rushing. In fact, I've been painting since I was 12 and I'm 45 now. So I've been painting a lot for many years. And I got arthritis when I was 12 and I really couldn't do much of anything. I couldn't go to school for a long time. I couldn't walk, but I could paint. And one thing I've learned about that painting time is that the learning happens really slowly, that it happens really gradually. And even now, after painting for several decades, I can still make mistakes like I will do something that looks like an 8-year-old painted it, and it's because I'm not in the zone. It's so important. Like, how much have you slept? How stressed are you? What's going on in your life? And while painting can be a great stress reliever, if we can't like focus and push our thoughts out of our mind, it can show up in our painting practice. So always be gentle on yourself when you're painting. You might just be tired. You might not notice your progress, but progress sometimes looks like things like, I made a painting and the painting sucks. Like, I won't hang it on my wall. But did I learn a new color mix? Did I understand a concept I've been trying to get, like color bias or an aspect of color mixing? Did I learn a new technique like glazing or a wash, or did something become a little bit easier than it was before? So learning isn't always about perfect paintings. It's often about just understanding our medium or ourselves a little more, because painting, I think, is ultimately an act of the self, for the self, one that we can happily share with others as well if we choose to. So as I leave today, I just wanted to say I hope you enjoyed painting this green sea turtle with me today. And just to recap what you've learned, so we started with a grid and basic shapes, looking for proportions within our grid, and we drew our turtle. Then we built our turtle one layer at a time through paint, adding patterns and colors into the shell, using glazing to get the rays of sunlight filtering through the water. And finally, we added little bubbles to create this underwater scene and, bring some realistic water textures to life. Again, remember, the goal isn't just a perfect painting. With every project, please look for something new you learned, something you did a little better, or a technique you've practiced again. Those little bite-sized lessons, they really truly do add up over time. Now, I would love to see your finished painting, so be sure to share it in the class album on the website. There is an album for every painting we have ever done, or also you feel free to join our Facebook sharing group. If you're not already in there, it's a really wonderful place where we can see your work and you can check out what others have painted as well. Now, if you would like to keep this particular class, you can tip to own it for lifetime access over on my website. And all of my classes are just a few bucks. And again, that gives you lifetime access to the class, the color mixing guides, and more. Now, if you are part of Kick Academy, this lesson is now part of your library, along with over 650 other detailed step-by-step classes. I have creative challenges within the Kick Academy as well: a cloud challenge, a blending blast, a sketchbook challenge, move mountain challenge, a tree challenge, things that really take a deep dive into particular subjects. So feel free to check that out. I'll put links to both the sharing group and Kick Academy below if you are interested in more. Now that's it for me. I will be back next weekend. Oh my goodness, we are going to be painting a pumpkin in a fairy house. So really realistic texture, but in this adorable fantasy fall scene. And we are also painting an underwater scene again, but this time we're going to be doing fish. So pumpkins and fish for swimming, more techniques to explore. Until then, take care, and I hope you keep it colorful. Bye.